is my comforter, my all in all. Here in the love of Christ I stand. There I'll stand here in the power of Christ. I'll stand.
Once again, good afternoon and welcome to the second session of the webinar, Training Developing Faculty Peer Facilitators for InFLeX Modality. As a form of a review, our first session was last January 12, 2021, and our speaker, Dr. Hanna Terras of Tampere University of Applied Sciences in Finland, talked about how we may engage our students in an online learning environment. We learned a great deal on the different models of learning designs and some important principles of how we may view teaching online. Today, we'll be tackling about another important aspect of online, distance, and flexible teaching and learning modality. Today's lecture is entitled Maintaining the Integrity of Assessment, and as many of us perhaps relate to this issue, especially that we were caught unawares as we implemented InFLeX modality in our university. We are very fortunate to have with us a reputable expert and professor from KU Leuven in Belgium who will be sharing his expertise on this area. Our esteemed speaker holds a Master of Science degree in Electrical Engineering from the University of Kent, Belgium, a Master of Science degree in Biomedical Engineering from the KU Leuven, Belgium, and a PhD degree in Electrical Engineering from the same institution. He worked at the University of Alberta, Edmonton in Canada, at the Open University of the Netherlands, and at the Leuven University College in Belgium. From 2001 till 2012, he was the head of the Media and Learning Center, and later he became director of the Teaching and Learning Department at KU Leuven, Belgium. Currently, he is professor at the Faculty of Engineering Technology at KU Leuven and policy coordinator learning technologies with a special focus on multi-campus and distance education. He is teaching courses on media production and development of learning materials and on professional and intercultural engineering skills. He is actively involved in different networks of universities to improve education in an international context. He is a regular panel member of review committees to assess quality of education in Flanders and Netherlands. Ladies and gentlemen, our very esteemed speaker, help me welcome Dr. Professor Wim van Petegem. I hope I made the pronunciation right.
Perfect.
Sir?
Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and also from my side, welcome in this webinar. Good afternoon. Here in Belgium, it's still morning, but I'm very happy that I can be with you, although from a distance, but this is the best we can do in this Corona times, let's say. Let me first present my presentation. Yes, I hope you can still see my presentation. Yeah. The title of this presentation, or the topic of the presentation, is about assessment, and I slightly changed the title a little bit because I think it's important that we consider assessment for learning, yes, but also of learning for sure. And so I prefer to call the title Assessment of or for Online Learning. That will be the topic for today. But before we start, and let me first think about what is assessment, or what kind of images do we have in mind when we think about assessment. For sure, I think that you will recognize this picture. It's someone who is writing an exam. He got the questions on paper, and then there is maybe a score sheet, or there is blank sheets that he has to fill out, or she has to fill out. That's the normal, let's say, traditional way that we have in mind when we talk about assessment. And then a classroom like this, where students are sitting next to each other, trying to focus on their own sheet and not cheating, let's say. That's what we have in mind when we talk about assessment, I think. The classical way, the traditional way of assessment. Nowadays, I think that maybe there is also a picture like this that we can get in mind. It's not only the paper and pen or pencil situation. We can also imagine that we will use computers or laptops or whatever. The connection with technology, ICT, is already also introduced in assessment. And this is the way that we think about assessment, I think, nowadays. There is a classroom setting. Students are focusing on their own work. There is a teacher in the classroom that is proctoring and making sure that no one is trying to cheat. Okay. I would also like to show you this picture. It's also a way of assessment, but it's a totally different way of assessing, I think. You still see the teacher, and the teacher is marking what the student has done in this case. Well, it's young children, but you can translate that to higher education as well, I think. But the teacher is also sitting next to the student and is looking at the student, is listening to the student, and is helping the student, is giving sort of feedback to the student. Well, at least that's the image I get from this picture. It's also about assessment in this case, and I think that we should also keep that picture in mind when you're listening to my lecture of today. And just to make it even more challenging, I would like to show you this picture. And here you see a lot of students all in the same room. There is, well, you can hardly see the teachers on the picture. Students are using paper, yes, but they are also using their computers, and they are not focusing themselves on their own work. They are maybe even working together. Maybe they are also helping each other. And so I wonder if we could also imagine such a picture when we talk about assessment. And I hope at the end of my lecture that we could maybe look again at this picture and then ask ourselves how could we consider this situation also in terms of assessment when we talk about assessment. Okay, I just wanted to share these different pictures to set the scene a little bit. What do we have normally in mind when we talk about assessment and evaluation, but also try to be a bit more provocative and also try to think about other kinds of pictures that may be also related to assessment. And I would like to come back to these situations during my lecture. But before we start, I think it's good to give a little bit of background to you. The first thing I would like to share with you is why are we actually talking about assessment? Why is it so important, assessment? Or why do we think it's so important? First of all, I think, well, I've taken this list from a very well-known resource in online education. Some of you might have heard about Tony Bates, who is a sort of long-term outstanding scholar in distance education. He comes from Canada, and he has written an online manual, handbook, that you can all download or even read it online, called Teaching in a Digital Age. I can strongly recommend that as a resource for yourself. And he also asked the question there, why are we talking about assessment? And he gives a list of reasons which we can go through here. First of all, it's of course, it has to do with the student learning. And assessment is important because we want to see how that learning is making progress and how we could maybe improve that learning process. Assessment has also to do with let's say the end goal, to assess what students know at the end of the course and how they have achieved these learning goals. Assessment is also important for us as teachers because we want to know how our teaching is going. Do we do the right things when we are teaching? If we have provided learning materials or learning activities to the students, we want to know if these learning activities and learning materials are purposeful, if they have achieved what we had in mind. Assessment might also be outside the classroom setting and not just only related to students and teachers. It might also be important for employers to check or to know about what has this student that is coming for a job here, what has he or she learned, and what are the skills and competences he or she has achieved, and to what level do they have achieved this. So there is also information that we could share with potential employers of our students. Maybe assessment is also important for students who want to pursue their studies and maybe to go for a PhD research. For instance, in my own university, it's important that you have good marks if you want to go for a PhD program. Only then you can enter the PhD program. So assessment is important to give a sort of entrance ticket to further studies, maybe higher levels of studies. Assessment might also be important in some countries. It's less the case in my country, but I know in some countries it's important that assessment, the marks and the grades that are given to the students, is in a way interpreted as a sort of quality measure of the institution itself, and how the organization of education, of teaching and learning is happening in the institution, and that is then linked to accreditation of the institution or linked to the funding of the institution. So there is different reasons, and maybe there is more reasons, maybe there is special reasons in your situation why assessment is an important thing to consider. Okay, that's one thing I would like to share with you before we start really talking about different ways of assessment. Another thing I would like to share with you is, and it's a bit related to what I just mentioned about the employers. It's also related to the fact that the students we are assessing are particular human beings, and they have their own characteristics. And so before we start thinking about how can we assess what the student knows or what he can or not can do, the skills and competences, let's say, before we want to consider that, I think it's very important that we also know about the characteristics of our students, that we know the type of students we have, also to know what the current characteristics of our students. Students nowadays are different from, for instance, when I was a student 30 years ago. And so we also need to know a little bit about these students to better understand what kind of assessment is needed and how do we approach assessment of these new students, let's say, new generation of students. For instance, one aspect that is very different from the current generation of students compared to mine generation is the fact that the students nowadays are very much interested in technology and really love technology and want to use technology, not just in their private lives, but they imagine that all the technology is also part of their study life, let's say. And so we should also keep that in mind when we talk about assessment later on. There are other characteristics mentioned here on this slide, and that's just a result of a study we did almost 10 years ago to characterize our students. At that time, they were still called the Millennium Generation students, but nowadays we are even one generation further, and the current generation of students is called the Generation Z. You might have heard about that. This is the generation that doesn't know any world without technology. They have been born with their smartphones, so to say, and they know they do not know a world where there is no internet. Of course, this is a bit exaggerated and generalized. There is well, and I know also in your country there is still people that are not having access to all the technology. That's true, but in a general way, we may assume that a large group of students is very is living in a world where technology, ICT, is like a normal good, and so we should keep that in mind also when we talk about not just teaching and learning, but also about assessment. Especially when I show this slide, where you see, if you look at that student nowadays, what kind of tools they are using and how they are embedded in a world with all these apps and with all this software, tools, devices, and so on. These are the things that our students in general are familiar with. And then if you see such a picture, if you see all this technology, all these tools and applications as a sort of toolbox, toolkit that people are using in their daily lives, also when they study, and if you then look back to that first picture I've shown you about assessment, someone sitting on a table with a paper and pencil and trying to write an exam, that's a bit different, I think. There is a gap between what we are used to when we think about assessment and the world in which our students nowadays are living. So I think that there is some things that we need to rethink about assessment, I guess. Going a bit further, it's not just the characteristics of our students, of the current generation of our students that is important. It's also the sort of skills that the employers, and again, I'm referring to the labor market, the skills we expect our students to get in the end of their programs are, well, these are the skills that employers are mentioning. Next to the knowledge, of course, in the domain that the students are studying, they also are expected to have these skills like complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, and all these kind of things. There is a little shift, and it's changing over time. That's true, but in general, there is a lot of what we call 21st century skills that are expected from our students when they graduate. And that means that we also should rethink our ways of assessment. It's not just the knowledge that we have to test or evaluate. We also need to think about how can we address these skills. It's even, I've shown, I will show you this picture as well. The previous one was from a company that is doing trend watches. This one is from a university, and they also try to define what kind of skills do our students need when they graduate. And it's totally different kinds of skills than just repeating knowledge. I think you can agree with me that that this is a different type of skill set that our students should achieve or should obtain when they graduate. And then comes Bloom, I think. We all know, or well, most of you know, I guess, Bloom's taxonomy. It's sort of ranking from lower to higher order level skills that our students need to achieve. And it starts from the simple knowledge, that was the first level, let's say, up to over comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, up to evaluation. That was Bloom's first set of labels to rank on skills that students need to achieve. I think that his PhD students then made it a bit more active, and rather than substantives, they were introducing active verbs. That's the second column in this picture. Linked to the levels that Bloom originally has identified. But nowadays, in the digital world, there is also some room for a small adaptation of Bloom's taxonomy in terms of what kind of skills that we expect our students to have. And then you see in the third column, slightly different words that are a bit more adapted to the digital world. And it goes from doing up to creating at the highest orange level here, but also one step more. And that's maybe also important when we think about assessment. You see at the highest level that you not just create things, but that you are also able to share what you have been creating. And also there, I think that this can be linked to assessment very well. And then you see in the other columns different words that could help you to understand better what these different levels are. Active verbs that you could use. Okay. So I started with giving some pictures to set the scene and to let you think about, okay, what do we have in mind with assessment and what could it also be if we look at the more chaotic pictures, let's say. Then I've given you some background. Why is assessment important? But also a first step in that process is getting to know your students and getting to know what your students need to achieve, not just in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of skills. And especially this slide here with Bloom's taxonomy adapted to the digital world with active verbs explaining these type of skills. Okay. If we then look a little bit more in detail on what we need to do when we are introducing assessment and assessment formats in our courses and programs in our teaching and learning in instructional design. Let me then first show you this picture, which is a sort of explanation how we look at course design or program design in my university. It all starts in the right lower corner with the student characteristics, which I just mentioned. And then we first set the goals, the objectives of the course or the program, which is on the right upper corner. So we define learning objectives. I know that in some cases it's called learning goals or learning outcomes. They are all slightly different terms. I agree. But in general, there is a sort of goal that we set for the students. And to achieve that goal, we define learning activities. It's a process of learning that students have to go through. Okay, that's the purpose of the course or the program. And that happens in a learning environment, which is at the left part of the picture. And that learning environment consists of two elements. There is a whole support part in that learning environment, and there is the evaluation or assessment part. We will not focus in this lecture on the support part, which constitutes of contents and teaching methods and learning materials and support people and so on. But that's not what we will focus on today. We will focus on that other element in the learning environment, which is the evaluation or assessment part. Okay. I think that it's important to mention, but quickly, that when we talk about assessment, it's about how well have our students achieved the goals we have set for the course or the program. So we give them some opportunities, learning activities. You see the pieces of the puzzle where they have a possibility to travel, to walk through a certain process, learning process to the goal. Yeah, the goal is formulated, and I think you might be familiar with SMART ways of formulating learning objectives. SMART in the sense that your learning objective should be specific, it should be measurable, and I will come back to that. It should be achievable, it should be relevant, and it should be time-bound. I think in terms of assessment, what we want to assess, the learning objective, the learning goal, it's important that that learning goal is also defined in a measurable way, so that you actually can assess if the student has achieved the goal. Yeah, so it's really important that we take some time to define our learning objectives in a smart way, with the emphasis when it comes to assessment to measurable. Right? Okay. Having said that, there is two ways of assessment. Assessment can be done during the process, when the student is putting the pieces of the puzzle together, going through the learning activities, or it can be done at the end to see if the objective has been reached, has been obtained. Yeah. The first way of assessment is called formative assessment. The second way is called summative assessment. Okay. The first is rather called assessment for learning, and the second, summative, is more called assessment of learning. Okay. What do we mean then by formative assessment? Like I already mentioned, it is occurring during a learning activity. It's aiming to monitor the student progress in his or her learning process. It's more about providing the student with feedback, trying to explain to the student you're doing well, or there is something wrong here. Maybe you should pay a bit more attention to that, or just go through this set of exercises again, or read this chapter in the handbook. So it's more about helping the student to improve their learning process. That means that it may occur several times during a course. It's up to you to decide at what moments in the course you will assess the learning process. And there is a lot of different formats that you could use in this case. The summative assessment, at the other hand, is something that usually happens at the end of a learning activity, at the end of a course or program, or when you have finished one part of the course, for instance, and that you want to wrap up things and conclude that part of the course. It's really evaluating the students, and that means that you will give the student a score, a mark, a grade, maybe a result. Okay. And that means that in a course, it's usually at the end, so it happens maybe once in the frame of a course or a mostly in a course. But like I already mentioned, it might also conclude a certain part of the course if there is distinguished parts in the course itself. And the way that you evaluate also demands for a specific format here, especially when you want to evaluate if the overall learning outcome or overall learning goal has been achieved, yes or no. Okay. So it's pretty clear, I think, that there is these two ways of assessment, and that you should, when you talk about assessment, not just think in terms of an exam at the end, but also something that you do during the coursework. Remember that picture I've shown you in the beginning, where the teacher is sitting next to the pupils, marking what they have been doing, but also explaining and helping them to better understand what went wrong or what they did well. Yeah, so that's more the formative part. Okay, when we then try to think about what kind of assessment forms or ways of assessment we can introduce, a risk we might take is that, oh, I think that for this course I need project work, and so then you think, okay, and now I will organize my course in function of the project work that I have in mind, in function of how I want to evaluate the students through their project work. That is maybe not the right way of working. The right way of working is, okay, what does the student need to get achieved at the end of this course? And then try to think, okay, what kind of learning activities are now better suited to achieve these goals? And linked to these learning activities, what kind of assessment can I then introduce here? So it's not the other way around. I think that in many cases, I've seen colleagues saying, oh, for my course, the best way to assess the students is they have to produce something, to create an artifact, for instance, and that is the ultimate goal of the course. And so I want to see that artifact at the end of the course. Well, it's slightly different, the instructional design process. I think it's first thinking in terms of what need the student to achieve in terms of active verbs. Remember Bloom's taxonomy, that they need to show, demonstrate at the end of the course, and then think about how you could lead the students, guide the students through a set of learning activities to achieve these goals and also to measure them. Okay. I would like to mention also here three important characteristics of evaluation, of assessment, that we also need to keep in mind. I think it's important that assessment is valid, is reliable, and is transparent. Valid means that your assessment needs to measure what it needs to measure. I mean, if the assessment should be fit with the learning goals, the learning the learning objectives that you have defined. Remember that I said and emphasized that it's important that your learning objectives are defined in a measurable way. So if they are defined in such a way, then it's also possible to think how you can actually measure that, and your assessment should be valid, should really measure this learning objective and nothing else. Yeah. That's important. It should also be reliable. That means that the variation in giving grades or marks of your assessment between students should be it should be in such a way that the assessment is saying that all good students get better marks, and all moderate students, let's call them, should get moderate grades, and students that are a bit weaker than the others, they should also get less marks, let's say. So the ways that you assess the students should be reliable over the population of students, should be also reliable over time. If you do the assessment with this group of students and you do a similar assessment with the next cohort of students, that should be a similar set of marks that you get, a similar way of numbers that come out of the assessment process, let's say. It should be reliable. It should also be transparent. That means that students need to know how you will assess them, what you will assess, and vice versa. You should also communicate as a teacher very well about your assessment process. That's the reason why it's also important to have clear learning objectives defined, so that you can exactly explain to the students what is expected from them and how you will evaluate them on these learning objectives. So these are also important things that we have to keep in mind when we try to set up assessments. Okay. So if we then talk about designing assessment, I think it's important first to choose between the formative and summative assessment. Well, choose is maybe not the right word. We need both when we talk about assessment. But when you're designing assessment, you have to focus either on a formative or summative aspect. And then we also need to think about who will assess in this case. Usually it's the teacher. But there is much more that many more people that we could involve in the assessment process. You could think about the student, him or herself. Then we talk about self-assessment. You could also think about the peers, the other students, for instance, in project work. How do they evaluate each other's work? You could also think about the computer assessing, and so no longer the human beings, but the computer assessment, automated assessment. So that's also something, a parameter, a characteristic of assessment we could keep in mind. And then, of course, there is the setting. Yes, do we have a possibility to assess online, or will it be offline in a face-to-face environment? Especially now in Corona times, a lot is moved to the online world, and only to a certain extent face-to-face exams are possible. So there is all these aspects we have to keep in mind, and then we can choose the format of what we want or how we would like to assess the students. I will have a better slide for this. These are all kinds of formats that we could imagine when we talk about assessment. And maybe the first one is a bit challenging. The first format mentioned here on this slide is called no assessment. In some cases, it's not really necessary to really assess something. The whole thing is that we get our students to learn, right? That's the reason why we organize courses, why we organize teaching and learning processes, why we have programs in the university. Our students need to learn. And in some cases, learning might also be, might happen in a very informal way. In that case, it's not always necessary to really assess something. I mean, for instance, students might learn through their engagement in student clubs or student organizations, might learn through the fact that they are participating in board meetings or in program committees or whatever. Yeah, that's also these kind of new skills, 21st century skills, remember, and they are learning these skills while they are doing something, and it's not always necessary to really assess these skills. It's sometimes just enough to give them a sort of badge that they have been doing this, and that this might also be part of their new personality when they graduate in the university. So there is not always a reason to really formally assess or to think about a format, how to assess some things. Maybe just giving some recognition is also an important aspect. Of course, the next one, computer-based multiple choice questions. That is a very normal way or that's a common format, let's say, that we could imagine, especially in the online world. You give the students all a computer, and then you let them do the exam online, so to say. Of course, I know that there is issues about are we then sure that this is the student that is sitting behind the computer, especially when they are doing the exam from home, or they are not cheating when they are doing the exam, and so on and so on. I will come back to that question later. Okay. Written essays, short answers, that's also a very common format. The students have to produce papers. It depends a little bit on the subject, the program, the course. In engineering, for instance, where I am working in, that's not a very common format, written essays or short answers. We are more into exercises and practical sessions, but not so much in written essays. But it's a format to assess the quality of the students. Project work, I already mentioned that, that this is an important or a possible format that you could consider. I know that in some cases there is some hesitation about project work, especially when the teams of the project doing the project are a bit larger. Then there is this tendency to think that students that there is only one or two students working really hard, and that the others are just thriving on the work of the others, and then how to assess the individual contribution of each one in the project is a very difficult aspect. Okay. There is possible ways to work around this, and maybe I can share one example of a course that I'm teaching and where project work is at stake. I also ask the students when they, at the end of the project, they have to write a report. I let them add an appendix to the report where they reflect on their work in the project. And that means that I expect that the students are explaining what their personal, individual contribution was to the project work. And that is an integral part of the project report. They have to present and submit. Okay. I know that there is some social pressure there in the team to write properly what the individual contribution is. And as it is an integral part of the report, students know that beforehand, that they will have to write down what they exactly have been doing in the project compared to their colleagues. right? And that also helps, I think, at least that's what I've seen, that the whole team is actually really nicely distributing the tasks, and everyone is then able to write at the end in the appendix what exactly he or she has been doing in the project team. And yeah, that's maybe one simple way to include a sort of check that everyone has contributed in equal amounts to the project. Okay. The next one here on the list is blogs and participation in online discussion fora, and maybe Wikipedia is here also. The reason why I mentioned Wikipedia is I know an example in a course taught by a colleague here at my university. We have been saying that the toolkit our students are using nowadays, there is a lot of tools and apps and software and things that they use when they are learning, and why not use that toolkit for assessment as well? Yeah. So what he thought is that, okay, if students want to know about a certain lemma, they go to Wikipedia in many cases, and there is a lot of information there. They have to be critical on the value and the correctness of the information there. And that is now exactly what he wants the students to do with his form of assessment, and that is students need to find a web page in Wikipedia, a lemma, where they think that they can contribute to the value or the correctness of that lemma. So they have to actually suggest improvements on that page, for that lemma. And that is what he wants the students to do. He wants them to know about Wikipedia, to be critical about Wikipedia, but also to contribute to improve the quality of Wikipedia. And that is the way that he is assessing the students, the value of what they are contributing to a certain lemma. Okay, mind mapping is mentioned here. It's another tool that you could use, not just the paper and pencil technique or open questions or multiple choice questions. You could also ask the students to draw a mind map to explain a certain concept from in the course. Maybe a bit more than just a concept, but maybe summarize a whole chapter, let's say, and trying to rephrase the chapter in a very original way with a picture and in own wording, let's say. Video is another format you could use for assessment. For instance, I'm teaching a course on visual and experimental anthropology with a colleague from social anthropology. And the whole idea there is that students, rather than writing again a new paper, that they document their research and analyze their findings with the use of a video. Rather than a paper, they have to make a video. Nowadays, students are quite experienced in using their smartphones to produce video material. Why then not let them make a video and submit their video as a sort of assignment, as something that we can assess? So that's something that I think students are in their normal lives. They are using, they are watching YouTube, they are watching TikTok, or making videos themselves for TikTok. Why not then let them make a video for their learning purposes? We even go further in the course. It's not just a video film nowadays. We also let them make a video installation, because there is already cheap equipment nowadays where you could imagine virtual reality, where you could link several devices together. So there is a lot more that we can do with video nowadays, and letting the students experiment with that is something that I think is well closer to the world in which our students are living. E-portfolio is another format. I think that we all know what it means. It's sort of assembly of all kinds of artifacts and things that students have produced during a course or maybe a full program, and that in a digital format. So it might include their papers, it might include their exams, it might also include, and it should actually include, reflections of the students on what they have been doing. We do that, for instance, in our postgraduate program on innovation and entrepreneurship for our engineers. They have to do an internship in a company, and during that internship, we ask the students on a regular basis to fill their portfolio with things that they have been doing in the internship. That allows me as a coach to understand what the student is doing during the internship. It also allows the student to keep track of what they are doing and how they are making progress in their internship. And self-reflection, self-assessment is then one part of how you could use that e-portfolio for assessment in this case. Self-assessment is thus what I said, reflecting on what you have been doing. Peer assessment, I think I already explained that when I was talking about the project work. And then simulations and educational games, virtual worlds, that might also be an interesting format for certain aspects or certain courses. I know, for instance, in economics, students are presented with business games they have to play, which is fully online. That might be simple software, with Excel sheets sometimes, but it might also be a real game that they have to play and that they have to adopt themselves a certain character in the play, and that they have to play that role in the game and try to learn through playing that role in different situations, and depending on how they answer or how they react in certain situations, they go through another set of new exercises or new steps in the simulation game. So I think that and there is still more formats that you can imagine, I think. Sometimes I say the sky is the limit. It all depends on the creativity of you as a teacher, how far you go in new ways, new formats of assessment that you would like to introduce. Okay. So that was the part on instructional design and how you could think about assessment, how to implement it in your course. Let's consider a bit further, maybe some provocative questions. I think I already addressed something about can we be sure about the student taking the exam online? Are we sure that he or she is not trying to cheat there? I will take these two questions together. Well, identifying the student is maybe a slightly different question, right? In my university, we think it's very important to respect the privacy of our students, and students are also very keen on that, and they really do not want us to go too far in letting them prove that they are alone in the room where they do the exam. I mean, we can ask that, and we ask it. They have to turn around 360 degrees with the camera and showing the room so that we are sure that there is no one else in the room. That's something that we can still do, but there is also some hesitance there because not all students want to show the place in which they are living or want to show the place in which they are doing the exam. And I can respect that. I mean, we have to respect the personal situation of the students here. That is, I think, important to consider as well. How do we then try to avoid cheating of the students? Well, let's say, I will put it here very provocative. I assume that students will try to cheat. But then it's me as a teacher that has to try to find a way of assessing that it doesn't matter if they cheat. Let me give an example here. If we ask the students to write a review of a book that they have to read, right? We all know that you can find these reviews online. And then it's very easy to cut and paste and take the review that you find online and try to maybe here and there adapt it a little bit so that it looks your own product. Yeah, and then we need fancy software to detect that students have plagiarized what was already written by someone else and that you could find openly online. Okay. I assume that students will do that. So I will ask a different question to the students. I will ask the students, find me 3 book reviews, 3, and compare them and explain me why you think that one of the 3 is the better one. Yeah, and at that moment, it doesn't matter. Actually, it doesn't matter that students are finding things. You actually ask them to find things online, and you know that they will do that anyway. But let them do it in a smart way, so that you can also assess if they have read the book, if they understand what the book was all about, and if they can actually be critical about the book reviews here. I think that this is a better way of trying to do all kinds of tricks to avoid cheating of the students. Just assume they will do and try to use your imagination, your own creativity to adapt the question in such a way that it doesn't matter that they go online and find things. Okay. I see that time is flying, and we should also keep some time for questions from your side. Maybe I should think about which one can I, can multiple choice questions assess higher level conceptual skills? I think that the multiple choice question exams are a bit, we need to be careful there. You can, especially for facts and definitions and concepts and lemmas and so on, you can use multiple choice questions. But when it comes to more creativity, analyzing and synthesizing levels of the Bloom taxonomy, then multiple choice questions are certainly not a good idea. And then we need to find other ways to address these higher order skills, let's say. Is it possible to test practical skills in an online environment? Well, I think in certain circumstances that is possible. But for instance, when we think about medical sciences or nursing, and it's very important that you need to see how a student is behaving in front of a patient, and that is, that's something very difficult to do. Even in a written exam, it's very difficult to do that. So also in an online environment, it's maybe difficult. Except maybe what you could ask is students to make a video of how they are treating a patient, and let them post that video that you then can watch and give feedback on. So also for that kind of things, use your imagination and creativity. Maybe technology can help here, and let the students experiment with that. Automated essay grading is another new format, let's say, that pops up nowadays. But I have to admit that this is more in an experimental phase, and that I haven't seen too much good software that could help you in automating essay grading in a very reliable way. And then the next question, when do you start thinking about assessment in the course design process? I think I already explained that. It's very early in the course design process. It already starts when you're defining your learning objectives that need to be smart and so measurable, especially measurable. Okay, what we haven't addressed here in this lecture is, and what I also consider as a very important aspect of assessment, that is the feedback you're giving to the students, and how that feedback matches with assessment at the one hand and the learning objectives at the other hand. I think it's really very important that we also as teachers learn the skills of coaching, of guiding, of giving feedback to our students in such a way that the feedback is all indeed helping to improve the learning process. So in helping the assessment for learning to take effect. I think that this is a very important aspect, but maybe that's for another lecture, how you organize that. Okay, linked to that is and maybe you could use this resource. It's from JISC. JISC is a UK-based initiative to help universities with their implementation of ICT for teaching and learning, especially now in Corona times. They are doing great work, and so maybe you could have a look at this reference where they actually talk about the assessment life cycle, and that starts from specifying the learning objectives and linked to that the assessment, and then going through this whole cycle where, and you see it very clearly, where feedback is also part of the assessment process. And that is, I think, a very interesting way of looking at assessment linked to the feedback we are giving to our students. Another resource, and it also comes from JISC, and that I would like to end with here, my presentation, is Trends in Assessment. And they have written a short report on the future of assessment with 5 principles that they think are important. And it's also good, I think, as a sort of conclusion, summary of what I've been addressing in this lecture. Assessment should be authentic, it should be accessible, it should be appropriately automated. We talk about continuous assessment, and we need secure assessment. Let me go through them one by one. Authentic assessment means that we need to take in mind the new situation where our students are living and working and studying, and also the new situation when they graduate, where they will work, and what the workplace, what the labor force is asking them. So as much as possible, we should link our assessment ways to what is expected from the students in the real world. Accessible means that we need to think about the issue of infrastructure, of access to ICT, but also to access for people that are maybe physically challenged and that need special equipment. For instance, in my university, when you have such a problem as a student, you are allowed to get special aids and tools to make sure that you have the similar chances as students that do not have that problem. So that's an aspect that is also important and more important, and that also technology can help us with. For instance, we are using for blind students that cannot see very well, we are offering them special software that they could use during the exam to help them, either through voice or bigger characters on the screen or whatever. Appropriately automated means that if possible, and if it fits in the purpose of the course, we can automate the process of assessment, also marking and grading, and maybe even giving some feedback. But like I said, in many cases, this is just an experimental phase. But I think that there is some steps, and they are talking in this report about 2025. I might expect that more will be done in the next years to come on that appropriately automating assessment. We talk about continuous assessment. Think of the title of my presentation. It's not assessment of learning, but it's also assessment for learning. So we are trying to guide the students through a learning process and to assess each step they are taking in the process and helping them, giving them feedback, trying to make it happen for them, and that will then in the end give a better mark, I think, also for the final assessment, the summative assessment. And then the secure assessment means that, we talked about that. We need to make sure that students are, that the right student is doing the right assessment, and that everyone is abiding the rules. Again, I think this is one way of looking at it. Use your imagination to make the environment also secure, even without the technology or fancy tricks and tools that you could use nowadays. Okay, and that's my final slide. I'm a little bit over time, but there is still some room for questions, I think. Shall I stop sharing my screen here?
Thank you so much, Dr. Wim, for such a very comprehensive lecture, I would say. Thank you for really giving us that bird's eye view from what is needed, and even the intricacies of in the learning design, you know, how the different kinds of assessments. And I think personally for me, that's very helpful and it's very insightful. I think the participants would agree with me on that regard. And I think Dr. Wim is now ready for your questions and queries, if there are. I'd like to request our tech team to check our YouTube live if there are questions posted there as well. All right. So far, we don't have questions yet on the
It must
FB
have been
Live.
very clear then.
How about our participants and audience in the Google Meet session? Any comments?
Hello.
Something that you want to clarify?
Hello.
Hi, Neil.
Sir
Hi,
Neil,
Wim.
you have something to say?
I'd like to ask a question just to maybe get the ball rolling for more questions. But my question is, I'd like to ask for your opinion on why it is important to come up with a number after assessment. Like, we are grading our students in terms of numbers. Like in the school where I teach, the highest grade is 100 and the passing grade is 75. Why do we have to use numbers to assess students, and what is the value in there? Or is there an alternative? So that's my question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. I think in let me first start by saying that not for all courses, or even not for all parts of the courses, we are giving really numbers to the students. Sometimes it's just sufficient to pass or fail that part of the course. For instance, when I was talking about the course I'm teaching on visual and experimental anthropology, it consists of 3 parts. And the first part is students need to show that they have the skills to make a video production before they can actually use the video production in the rest of the course, which is about anthropology. Okay, and for that first part, we are just giving them a pass or fail, and if we see that they have the skills, then they pass. If we see that they are lacking the skills, then they have to do a bit more exercises until what they show is of sufficient quality that we think they can do the rest of the course. So in that particular case, it's not important to grade and give numbers to the students, because it's not at that moment the purpose of to make them a very high level cameraman, for instance, or an editor. We just want to know if they have the skills, yes or no. But that's one particular case, and I want to emphasize that it's not always the case that we talk in terms of numbers. But I think in many cases it is important also for the employers or for further studies that students want to do. Remember the why assessment questions, that we try to sort of rank the students, and that we try to explain to students, you have the skills, potential skills, or you are potentially a good candidate for a PhD research. I mean, it's important that we could explain to students, if you want to enter a PhD program, that you need certain levels of skills, and if you do not have these level of skills, then it will be hard for you to enter a PhD program. And the most obvious way of trying to explain to students you have reached that level is by giving numbers in the assessment process. Is that important that it's 63 or 64%? That I doubt. But there should be sort of range that is that you could explain to students, look, you should be in that range if you would like to pursue this kind of studies. And employers might also be interested in students that have better results if they need to choose between certain candidates for certain jobs. And then also we need to provide the employers with that sort of information. I know in the US, for instance, and in many Anglo-Saxon universities, they are not using numbers, but they are using characters, and an A means very good, B means still good, C means sufficient, and these kind of things. That's another way of ranging the outcomes of a learning process, let's say. So it's a mixed sort of answer. I see some reasons for it, and I think that there is an opportunity here, maybe not to use the numbers exactly, but ranges of indications where students are compared to their peers. That should be possible, I think. Is that giving an answer?
Thank you very much, sir. That's a very comprehensive answer, and I really learned a lot.
There's maybe one thing I would like to add, and I experienced that
Sometimes
myself.
I just feel like,
I experienced myself when I was I'm teaching a course with an American university, and the way that they are assessing students and giving marks is different from what we are doing in my country. For instance, if here we are marking on 20, on a scale of 20, if you get 16 out of 20, that's a really good mark. That means that you are with the best of the class. In the US, if you give that number to students, 16 out of 20, they will be complaining because they think that a really good mark is 20. And if they have done everything that you asked, they should get 20. But that's not the case in my country, for instance. So these numbers and ranges might be careful in interpreting them if you are working in a global world, let's say. I wanted to add that.
Thank you very much, sir. Sometimes I just feel like my students are very efficient in the sense that when I ask them to do something, they will just do what I tell them to do. They won't add an extra effort.
Yeah.
And I wonder what my grades are really measuring. What does it mean when my student is 98? Does it mean that he's really good or he's just good at doing the
Yeah.
things I ask him to do? So that's just my
Yeah.
concern as a teacher.
Well,
Right.
but asking the question is already a very good step, I think, and I appreciate that you are thinking in that way. And it's a bit the same experience like I just explained with my American colleagues. If the students think that they have been doing exactly what you asked them to do, then they want the highest marks. While in my country, we rather think that okay, that's a sort of minimum. We also want to make you like critical thinkers and also self-reflecting about what you're doing. So you need to be able to do that extra step, and that is what we qualify as a good, for instance, master student. But okay, maybe there are next questions or remarks that we could consider.
We have one from the YouTube live from
Okay.
Francis Mendoza. The question goes like this: how do we ensure that learners' responses to our assessments are authentic? How do we ensure that the learners' responses to our assessments are authentic?
I'm not sure if I understand the question right. The question is about authentic answers to the assessment question, right? Okay. I'm not sure what to answer here. I'm not sure if this refers to what I was mentioning about authentic assessment, where there is real problems, the things that students will encounter when they go out and for work or for internships. I think that that this is the question, how they need to really solve these questions in society. Is that the type of question? It's a bit difficult, I think, that we cannot interact with the YouTube watchers. But let me already start with answering that, if this was the question. If not, then I will hear it later. But what we try to do is offering the students a lot of opportunities where they can indeed engage in work that is of value to society. Let me say it in this way. We are offering our students possibilities for internships. We are letting them do project work in collaboration with organizations outside the university. When students are doing their master's thesis, for instance, or their bachelor proof, they are solving problems where there is always a strong link with society. And society is very broad. That might be the government, that might be companies, that might be non-profit organizations, that might be your neighborhood. So we try to include, let's say, the outside world into our courses, into our programs in such a way that also the assignments we give to the students are linked to that world, to the problems that may occur in that world, and where we expect our students later on, when they graduate, to work on. And that also helps them to really understand that it's not just another exercise from a handbook that they have to solve. No, it is a real world problem, something that has value, something that appeals to them. something that they could also see when they work on the problem, that they are helping to solve the problem, and that also gives them an opportunity to really make a solution that is authentic, that is really working, that is really appreciated by the society, the neighborhood, or whoever is involved in that case. I'm not sure if this is the correct interpretation of the question, and if this is an answer.
Yes. Dr. Wim, the Mr. Francis said in the YouTube live, yes. And how do we know that if they're the ones who solve the problems presented? I think, Dr. Wim, you provided a very good response to that
Okay.
on the area of placing the real world, no, that context
Yeah.
to our course, and really letting the students produce a working solution for that. I hope that answer Mr. Francis' query.
Mhm.
We also
Yeah.
have another question.
I think there
Okay.
is a question in the chat I've seen from the dean, I think. Yeah, online assessment is very challenging. Can you give us tips on how we can conduct online assessment? Well, there are different aspects. If it's, for instance, when we had to switch to online education last semester, we also had to switch to online assessment for a certain part of the student, a certain group of students, especially our international students, because they could not return to the campus. They could not be physically available on the campus for assessment, and so I had to imagine an online equivalent of what we do normally with our students, and for instance, with the course I'm teaching on pathways to sustainability, it consists of two parts. There is some project work to do with the students. I will not address that here, but there is also a multiple choice part in the course, because the students need to explain or to show that they know the concepts and the definitions and the theories of sustainability. And normally that is a multiple choice question exam where we ask the students we provide them with papers and a score sheet, and they have to color or to mark the right answers on the score sheet, and that is then automatically corrected by the computer. I could not do that with my online students, the international students that were far away. The only way that I could imagine was that I organized an oral examination where they also got multiple choice questions, because that was the way that we could test their knowledge about concepts and theories. And rather than giving them the full time and the full amount of questions, we selected randomly a part of the questions. And we asked the students to answer on the spot these questions. But on the spot means, in this case, I was presenting them the question with the 4 possible answers, and I said, okay, now you have to talk through you get 3 minutes to answer the question, and you have to tell me what your reasoning is when you're answering this question. If the question was what is the definition of, and then there is 4 possibilities, then they had to say, okay, the first possibility, I do not think that this is the right answer because, or the second answer, I think that I doubt here, I'm not sure yet if this is the right answer or no. I go to the third one, and so they had to go through the different answers and to talk about what their reasoning was, to talk loudly about how they were trying to answer the question. So that was for me a way that I could still use multiple choice questions in the online assessment, but in such a way that I was pretty sure that the student was not cheating at that moment and was just was trying to show that he or she knows the subject of the course, right? So it like I already told in the lecture, I think it's your own creativity and imagination that you have to use to find a certain way of adapting the online assessment from the normal way of assessing the students. I think that this might be a good example where you could still use a not so easy or it's not so easy to transform a multiple choice question to an online format where you're sure that the students are not cheating, I have to admit. But with some creativity, it's possible, I think. I don't know if this is a good answer to the question, but it's certainly one that worked in my case.
We have two more questions. Let me ask
Okay.
Dr. Wim if we can cater both.
Yeah, we can do that. Just for 5 minutes, that would be okay. I have another meeting right now, but it's okay. Let's go.
All right. Okay, the first question is from Ma'am Geraldine. I hear students who tell that they are doing a lot of effort and many tasks for a course, but the teacher gave a low grade that is not consistent to their expectations. How would this be avoided?
Yeah, I think that I think I already answered that question during my lecture. It's very, very important to define clearly what the learning objectives are and to be very transparent to the students on what you expect from them. Smart formulated learning objectives are important in this case, I think, and also be very transparent on what you expect the students to do. The second part of the answer could be that if you also think about assessment for learning, that you give the continuous feedback to the students how they are progressing in their learning process, so that students get the feeling along the way that they are on the right track, or maybe that they get the feeling, oh yeah, I need to do something else, I need to do effort in that or this direction, or maybe I should do this or that to get better results. So I think that these are possible answers: smart formulated learning objectives, being transparent about the assessment process, and also use assessment for learning, the formative part, so that students get the feeling about what you expect from them.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Wim, for that answer. I hope that answered Ma'am Geraldine's query. Last question for our session this afternoon from Ma'am Eileen Villaruz. She commented, hello, Dr. Wim. Shout out to AVLM alumni who are watching. And she presents one question. Does taking the assessment or the results it generates have direct value to teachers and learners?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Does taking the assessment or results it generates have direct value to teachers and learners?
I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly. Is the question if the results of assessment will help us to improve our teaching and learning? Is that rephrase? Is that the question?
May I request Ma'am Eileen to clarify if you can? All right. Yes. Yes, Dr. Wim. I think that is what
I think, yes, indeed. It can indeed help. That especially for me as a teacher, if you see that, for instance, if you have like 20 multiple choice questions, and they are covering all parts of the course, then especially with an automated correction with the computer, in my case, that was the computer does then also perform a lot of statistics on the results that students have produced, and I can learn from these statistics what parts of the course are difficult for the students, because, or maybe it can also teach me or give information about the value of a certain question. If a large group of students is answering the wrong way, it might be that the question was not good, but it might also be that this part of the course was maybe needed some revision. And actually, we are forced in the university by our student evaluations, if there is low grades or marks for a certain course, that we rethink how it come that the marks are so low. It might have to do with the cohort of students, but it might also have to do with the type of exam or assessment that we did. It might also be that there is some parts in the course that we have to revise. And that is something that we have to explain in response to the student evaluations that are done by after each course. So yes, the results, the marks, the grades that the students get through the exam is valuable information for me as a teacher to improve what we are doing in the course. So I think that that's one way also for me as a teacher to get that information and feedback. Okay, I think that this gives an answer, Aline.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Wim, for that very brilliant answer. And I think that would be the last question. Dr. Wim, is there any chance that if there are other queries, we can reach you?
Absolutely. And I think you have all my contact details, and you can contact me through whatever means you want. You can use my email address. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn. So no problem.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wim. And that, my friends, ends our forum and question and answer. And we hope that you have gained much in today's lecture and discussion. And before we end, for our training participants, please be reminded for our asynchronous activities posted in our Molly classroom. So please don't forget to visit it. For all our webinar participants, please access the evaluation link for your certificate of attendance. The certificate of attendance will be sent to your given emails. There are two announcements before we go and close this session. But before I do that, let's just give Dr. Wim a virtual round of applause to show our appreciation for a very wonderful lecture this afternoon. I was about to say, give a virtual applause. Hindi pala ito Zoom. It's not Zoom, so we can't do that. Anyway, so thank you so much, Dr. Wim, for giving us a very insightful talk this afternoon. And definitely, there are a lot of tips that we got from you, and we are excited to apply it in our courses as well as we start our second term for this school year. For our announcements coming up in the webinar series is on student support and community of learning. That will happen on February 5, 2021. The same time, 4 to 6 Philippine Standard Time with our speaker, Associate Professor Charisse Reyes of the UPOU. So I hope that you would still be joining us in that webinar session. Second announcement is the next public lecture of Dr. Hannah Terrace as part of the visiting professorship hosted by the Department of
Ano
Technology,
nga,
Teacher and
nalaging. Gamins listen ko.
It will happen on February 2, Tuesday. That's 4 to 6 p.m. And we hope as well to see you there. For other queries and comments, please do not hesitate to contact us in any of our communication channels. At this point in time, I'd like to thank you for participating. And this is your moderator, Janil Medina. And thank you and God bless. May we have a good weekend ahead of us.
Thank you very much for being with you, and I wish